Hello and welcome to the Aviation Briefing with me, William Hallowell. In this podcast series, I speak with media and industry guests about the biggest news stories and issues facing the industry. Today, I'm joined by Adina Szonyi, EASA's ground handling expert, and we're going to be discussing EASA's new proposed regulations for ground handling at EU airports. So it's very good to have you here today, Adina.
Thank you, William, for inviting me. Glad to be here too.
So I suppose my first question, just to kick off the episode, is, could you give us a brief overview of what the regulations entail, what the elements are, the objectives, and, essentially how it differs to the way ground handling and aircraft operators work together at the moment?
Sure, certainly. So I should perhaps start by saying that today, European Union has no regulation on ground handling to address safety. There are several member states that apply national regulations, but they apply only in their state. So this would be a first proposal to have one single regulation instead of 30 or 31, as the EASA member states are, to address the safety in ground handling. So we just published the opinion this Tuesday, and the opinion has a proposal for a regulation to cover the following main crucial aspects that we have identified in need of improvement. And they are probably the first and most important requirement will be for organizations providing ground handling services to develop and implement a management system. What does it mean in EASA regulatory terms? A management system includes a safety management system with its very important component of safety culture and just culture. Then there are requirements within this management system for training. So the training for ground handling personnel will become mandatory. Then another important aspect is for organizations to develop and implement a maintenance program for the ground support equipment used for the provision of the ground handling services. There will be requirements on the personnel and also, or mainly, let's say, for the personnel in charge of the most important functions, for example, safety management or training or operations or maintenance of GSE. Another important element of this regulation or the proposed regulation is the part regarding the operational requirements, where we don't provide too much, but we want organizations to implement either the industry standards or their well-developed operational procedures. And last but not least, we propose, and this is again a first, probably globally, if we speak globally of regulators proposing anything in the ground handling domain, there will be requirements for competent authorities of the member states to exercise verification, or in our terms, we call it oversight of the ground handling services and the organizations providing them at the airports in the European Union, subject to our basic regulation. I can tell more about that, what it means.
Okay, so in terms of, looking at day-to-day operations, how will this change the way, ground handling is performed at, the 30 member states airports?
So perhaps I should tell you a few words about how we started to work on this. We initiated the work on this task early in 2018, when we had a number of about 46 or 50 interviews with main actors in ground handling. That was ground handling service providers, airport operators, and aircraft operators, as well as competent authorities, because we wanted to know the status quo. What was working in ground handling? What could have been improved? Where do they see the regulator being present and coming up with some proposal or with a regulation? So we identified some elements that were not working as well as expected. So we tried to intervene in those areas while keeping what was working well. So from what's working well today is that, as you well know, the ground handling industry has been self-regulating for many years, and they have acquired a wealth of expertise and lessons learned, and they have developed these industry standards that they are applying today. So this is working well. However, where they didn't see such a good application was where ground handling organizations, the way I like to call them, ground handling service providers, still provide the services as the air operators tell them to do. And this remains as such because the aircraft operators are still responsible for the safety of their aircraft. But the ground handling industry, as well as the aircraft operators, will want to see a better harmonization of these operational procedures. Just to give you one simple, very, very simple example of cases where you have, let's say, you have an aircraft, an Airbus A319, which today is being chocked and coned in 20 different times because 20 different air operators having an Airbus 319 in their fleet are having their own operational procedures on how the aircraft should be chocked. So this creates, of course, eventually this may create a potential safety hazard because for a person to know correctly and apply correctly 20 different procedures for the same type of aircraft, that doesn't make too much sense. So we are working towards harmonizing the way in which operational procedures are happening today. And we don't intervene in those places where things work well, meaning if somebody wants to apply the industry standards, they may continue to do so, of course. And if other organizations have developed their own operational procedures, they would also be allowed, they should also be allowed to continue to use them. This is just a very, very short aspect and brief aspect of what you asked me.
So obviously, the two main kind of takeaways, certainly that I've seen from the regulations, it's an emphasis on safety and cybersecurity. I suppose one of the questions I'd like to ask on behalf of ground handlers that I've spoken to is, why has it taken so long for EASA to bring in these regulations? Because as I say, I've spoken to ground handlers and they say this is something they've been campaigning for a long time. So they're on their end, they are very happy to see that this is finally come into place, and they'd like to see more global standardization, the precedent that these regulations set. Why has it taken so long?
William, I'll be honest. I don't have a very straightforward answer on that. I can give you some points, I can give you some ideas and some thoughts, which are valid, but it doesn't mean that this is the only reason why only now we are proposing a regulation. So first of all, you know that EASA is acting on behalf of the European Commission to propose regulations. And for us, safety comes first because this is our remit. This is our main business, let's say, to establish safety in aviation. And of course, the regulator was looking first and utmost to those entities and to those actors in aviation who are more prone, let's say, to had more appetite for the safety risk. And these are obviously the aircraft operators, the aerodrome operators, and the maintenance organizations. And that's why these were the first regulations to come, or the ATM and ANS domain, which is also huge and safety critical. So first, the European Union developed these regulations for these entities, and then eventually we identified one missing element in this puzzle, and that was ground handling, because safety starts on the ground. But because probably, and this is just a thought, I'm not sure that this is actually really what happened, because ground handling organizations have always been considered just a service provider, even though there are other service providers, and because the risk appetite, the safety risk appetite was lower in ground handling, perhaps it was considered sufficient when the ground handling industry was self-regulating through these industry standards, and also because they were always linked to what the aircraft operators were telling them to do. However, upon our discussions with the ground handling industry and the aircraft operators, it turned out that this is not enough. So we need to look more deeply into that. And we started analyzing the occurrences in ground handling since, I think the EASA has published the safety risk portfolio, including ground handling, since 2016 or 2017, if I'm not wrong. So we started to look into this until 2018, when the basic regulation, which gives us the right to exist, so to speak, extended its scope with ground handling. So then we were directly mandated to develop requirements for ground handling, which we started to do. Unfortunately, it didn't come out as fast as we wanted because we had to put a stop during the pandemic, which completely turned our plans and the world's plans upside down. So we had to put a stop for a year. And then probably another reason why it takes longer for us to issue proposals for regulations is because we consult a lot. And this consultation with all the stakeholders that are affected by what we do takes longer in terms of time and feedback and drafting and redrafting and improving. We consulted this opinion 2 times, once last year and another one time in 2022. And this is also something that takes time. So I believe that these might be the reasons why we didn't have a regulation on ground handling 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
So let's look more so, at the airport operators and ground handlers again in terms of, the benefits. What will they see improvements in with regards to these regulations? Obviously you've spoken about safety. One part that they seemed very enthusiastic to hear was that, it's going to improve in terms of cutting the bureaucracy, slashing the red tape in terms of, the sheer amount of auditing they have to do. It's not going to be as large as it was, prior.
Right. This is one of the forte points, let's say, and we aim. This is how we built. This is how we drafted the proposal, in order to ensure that ground handling organizations won't have to face or to withhold so many audits as they do today. And we said, okay, so what is the reason for a ground handling service provider to have so many audits today? Well, it's because the aircraft operators verify their contracted organizations probably at least 2 times a year. Or it's also possible that for de-icing activities, they verify the preparation for the de-icing season every year, which is not bad. But all these audits accumulated are spending accumulating probably more than a third of working time in a year for an organization. And I talk about a large organization. So we said, if we transfer this responsibility for verification of how the ground handling organizations provide their services, making sure that safety comes first, was by asking the competent authorities to take responsibility for the oversight. So what we foresee happening, and of course this is not going to happen overnight, because such a thing and building a trust relationship of trust takes time. We expect that the moment that the competent authorities will take over the oversight function, the oversight responsibility, the result of those audits and inspections can be then shown or presented by the ground handling organization to its clients and say, hey, look, you don't need to verify me or to control or to audit me anymore, because I am already verified by my own competent authority. And here is the result. You don't need to duplicate or multiplicate these audits that you have been doing to me so far, because I am proof and I am a declared organization. Therefore, the standard of my safety in my operation is proven by another entity right now. So what we intend by this is to reduce indeed the number of audits by the aircraft operators, and also enable them the possibility to, and of course this means a saving in resources on both sides, of the ground handler and of the aircraft operator. And we want them to focus rather on the aspects that are not verified by the competent authority, or not verified that frequently. The icing, for example, the competent authority will definitely not verify the icing every year. So this may remain with the aircraft operators. But in terms of the management system, in terms of training of personnel, this will no longer have to be duplicated by the aircraft operators.
So in terms of compliance, I mean, what will exactly, the ground handlers, the airport operators have to do to ensure that they are, following these new regulations? I mean, what does it mean for them in terms of, practicality?
So we thought of, it's not that we thought of, but the basic regulation already established that for a ground handling organization to start operating, it only needs to submit a declaration to its competent authority and then immediately start operating. This is a sign and start regime, let's call it like that, in which, because of the lower safety risk proven by the ground handling industry, is considered to be better and faster rather than having a certification process system like, for example, the commercial air transport operators have today, in which first they are being verified by their authority that they comply with the regulation, and only after they receive their approval may they start operating. With ground handling, it's not going to be like that. The declaration regime means you, the ground handling organization, are directly and first one responsible for the safety of your operation. And by signing that declaration, you actually acknowledge your responsibility and acknowledge that you comply with the ground handling regulation and the other smaller parts that are applicable to you. And once you sign this declaration, you send it to your competent authority. Then you wait for the competent authority to say, yes, thank you, I received your declaration, which is duly filled. And then you can already start preparing your services and start acting actually.
So could I just ask, what do you mean exactly by competent authority? You've used that term, a number of times here, but also,
Yes.
I saw, when EASA first published this news earlier this week, they used that term quite a lot. What is that actually? What is the meaning of that term? Who does that entail?
The competent authority is a body of a member state that is appointed by that member state. It's usually by the ministry, one of the ministries of a state, to take responsibility for verifying compliance of an organization with the applicable regulations. So what we, or the rest of the world, what we usually call in normal terms the Civil Aviation Authority. This is a body of a member state, a governmental body of a member state that verifies compliance with the applicable requirements.
And in terms of looking more widely at the regulation at the moment, I mean, is there a wider aim? Is this meant to be, the kind of forefront, the precedent for potentially global standardization? Because again, I've spoken to ground handlers who say, that's what they actually want. That's why they praise EASA for this week's announcement, because what they actually want is a global standardization for ground handling at all airports, on all continents. Is that something that EASA has considered?
Absolutely, we have, and we are always aware of what's happening at the high level at ICAO, because ICAO is the global umbrella for the safety of aviation. And we are also involved in the work done by ICAO with regard to ground handling. There is a task force, there is another subgroup, there is a panel here, a panel there, and the ground handling discussions we see taking place in very many panels on safety management, in flight ops, in aerodromes. And now there's this group ground handling task force, which has been working on the preparation of some standards and recommended practices at ICAO level. And in the meantime, they came up with this ground handling manual that was published at the end of 2019, which already contains a good set of guidelines and several examples of how organizations can improve safety in their operations and how they should look at the interfaces. So, of course, the aim is to tackle ground handling and to improve ground handling safety globally, not locally, regionally. But because we saw kind of a shyness, let's call it like that, a shyness from ICAO in requiring strong actions vis-a-vis how the ground handling should be overseen and how ground handling should be regulated. We are now thinking that probably we are a few, not probably, certainly we are a few steps ahead with this opinion. The good part is that we had in the ground handling group of experts who have been supporting EASA since the very beginning, since 2018, in drafting this regulation. Some of them are also members in these groups at ICAO level. So we're talking the same language and we try to have the same approach. Where we go already stronger at the European Union level is that we go one step further and actually require that competent authorities take over and that SMS becomes mandatory for ground handling organizations. So this is where we are with a few steps ahead. And still, indeed, ICAO does not have any clear, strong standards about ground handling yet. Not yet. It's work in progress.
Well, look, thank you very much, Adina, for joining me. It's certainly been, interesting just to get, the actual insights from EASA themselves or yourself. So look, thank you very much for joining me. And, it'd be great to have you on again in terms of, when we're looking at these sorts of regulation and industry updates. So thank you once again.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, William. Anytime.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This has been the Aviation Briefing with William Hallowell. Thank you very much for listening.